so we wanted to meet today to talk about the For the Time being release,
Yes.
which is getting re-released now with new remixes.
Yes, a ton of remixes I saw.
Yeah, amazing remixer. And you also did one.
Yes, I did.
And I thought we'd talk a little bit about the history of the track, because it's already like from, I think we produced the track in 23. It was really in 2003. It was released on the 2004 album.
Yeah.
Also with a bunch of remixes back then. And you were head of the label Dessous,
Yes.
or you still are, where we released the track on the album with a fantastic Erland Oye, super famous singer from Kings of Convenience, and also from his Whitest Boy Alive project,
Exactly.
his solo project. He was doing vocals back in the days for DJ Hell, for Roixop. He was singing Paulino, like super big track back in the days.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how, at what point did you realize that we do a track with Erland Oye, or what this track meant to you, or what was your thought? Because in a way, it's very, I mean, Erland has like a kind of a folk pop background in a way, and Dessous was like strictly old school house in a way. So that was probably the most pop cheesy track at that time you released on the label, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think in general, I mean, when it comes to vocals, there's a very like the classic vocal tradition, house vocal tradition, and then they have the new school vocals. And as you were saying, this was probably the first release with a vocal that didn't sound like the classic house stuff. But I was a big fan of Alan's work, that he did before. I always liked the more poppy stuff as well. So I think at the time it was a very good combination, which stood out from the rest of the music, exactly because of the vocal. It was so different from what other people were doing at the time. And it was a really standout release for us, I think, back then already. And a lot of fans, a lot of people were saying when I released this that they still love the Alex Kidd remix also, which is a very 80s kind of vibe. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, and nowadays, like vocals like this is like, it became super popular. We have like Monolink and those kind of like dreamy
I also
pop.
just did a remix for.
Oh, really? yeah, those kind of dreamy pop vocals became like a big thing, and luckily the track is still doing really, really well on Spotify and stuff. So it's kind of became like a classic, like a timeless electronic music piece of electronic music, which of course makes me very happy. And I'm like also like, I mean, it's 22 years since its release, and still people ask me to play it when I'm at a gig somewhere, like especially if I play somewhere at a new place. People are still asking for this, and like maybe 4 years ago I played in Kazakhstan, and then the warm-up DJ also played the Alex Kidd remix for that track. So it still keeps like playing and playing. And Erland Oye also started a new project, like a live project with Italian friends called La Comitiva. They are playing like ukulele and guitar, and they are performing this track as well live.
The ukulele version then.
Yes, exactly.
Nice.
And I've been to their concert here in Berlin at the, I don't know, like some open air Bühne, Waldbühne or something like that. And this track was like the biggest track of the show. Like people were standing up and cheering and stuff. It was really cool to see. And also on their merch, they released this T-shirt, which is for the time being.
Nice. Where's my shirt?
Yeah, I bought it. I had to buy it. So I'm really happy we managed to make new remixes, and I'm really happy you added a remix, of course. And maybe you can say a little bit about your remix, because your remix in a way surprised me because it's very close to the original, and you just added like a little bit of the Steve Bug touch and made it like a 2026 version in a way.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to remixes, I think I always try to pay tribute to the original and not like take it completely apart and use the parts that I thought were needed to fulfill this track in the first place, and then I strip off the stuff that I didn't like 100% feel like it's a Steve Bug kind of vibe. But with this one, I mean, I've been a fan from the very first moment. I really still love the original. I think it's a great track, and I felt, as you said, it just maybe needs a little bit of an update. So I just added the organ bass, something that I felt like would kind of add something more, even though it's old school, but still like adds kind of to a more modern kind of housey stuff that's released today. And I started with that, trying to figure out the original harmonies, and then I played the bass, and then started to adding stuff from the original, and then I ended up using almost all of the synth sounds and the vocals, of course. And I even built all the arrangement pretty much around the original build-up, because I already really, like when I added this stuff, I realized that it was really difficult to rearrange to and keep the same vibe. So that's why I wanted to use the whole vocals and not like really cut things apart. And so yeah, it's more like a real tribute to the original with a little bit of a addition and Steve Bug touch. Yeah.
So the original lyrics are like the interesting thing. I think maybe people don't pay attention to it, but like the main phrase, there will be a time, for the time being, comes very late in the track, right? Like like in there's one break before the end, and then there the vocals coming in. So so you didn't feel the need to use them already before. So you really stayed with the original structure.
That's what I always loved about it. You know, I mean, in general, this is what I love about like electronic the stuff that I play. It's like saving things for the later time. It's nowadays, you know, where everything's happening very fast and very people extension span is very short, and so it's not common to do this anymore. But I still feel like it makes tracks special and stand out from the rest, to save something for later minutes in the track.
Yeah. And how like, I mean, if you play like nowadays, you said like times changed a lot. I think it's also one reason is because you only play like you usually you get booked to play like a 2-hour set or something. Back in the days, it was more like 4 hours was like the regular set time, and sometimes you played all night long or like whatever. That's why you try to put as much music or like storytelling in a short 2-hour session. It's sometimes difficult, and then sometimes it's very difficult to include like a track which is building up so slowly, because you're also afraid like you're maybe losing a little bit like the opportunity to like tell more stories, and not just like if you play like tracks like this, that's like it's more like a short story, but like in a within 2 hours.
But then nowadays we always have to do like a short edit for we call it still radio edit, even though it's not for the radio, but it's more for streaming platforms. And I mean, if people want to play like a short version, they can always use that one and maybe extend the end with a bit of a looping for the beats or stuff like that. Or even make their own edits. A lot of people do their own edits these days, and where they kind of rearrange or just add a bit of beats at the end so that it's easier to mix.
Do you use the beat jump function on the CDJs sometimes?
Yes, sometimes.
So one thing we can also say is like we both worked for our labels with the same company, like the Superstition Entertainment Network. So that's very convenient to to work with them, and then like think about new remixes of old tracks and this kind of stuff. We decided now to only to call those short versions now the original version, and the other ones are now extended versions. So totally like a completely different approach, because the Spotify really, the demand is for the as short as possible in a way, right?
When you were talking about people are still asking about the track to play, do you think this is your biggest track that you've done in terms of what people ask? For me, it's obviously it's Loverboy still.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
from
yeah,
1999.
yeah, yeah.
It's going. It sometimes can be. You feel like you still love to play it out, or sometimes you have
Mm,
a hate love relationship with the
yeah.
track.
I can imagine that with Loverboy it's even more difficult for you because it's so minimal, and this
Yes.
minimal sound is so difficult to include in like the full sounds we have nowadays, like with like so many, yeah, so many sounds and effects and everything. And so you manage to drop the original often, or like it's more like a challenge to
I do.
squeeze it in.
I
Yeah,
do, yeah, I do. I do play the original mostly at the ends of my sets.
yeah.
Sometimes in the morning or something like that. Sometimes, I mean, luckily also there has been some remixes, some updates where where people build things around the original version, like Acid Pauli and Cats and Dogs were the latest ones, and I think I'm probably never gonna have anyone retouch it, but
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I have other remixes also to play, which
Mm.
is sometimes really cool. I don't have to stick to the original, but yeah, it's sometimes there's been times or years where I've been like I couldn't stand people asking for me to play the track
Yeah,
because I was like,
yeah,
come on, I have done hundreds tracks since the
yeah, yeah,
release,
yeah, yeah.
and I feel like it's people still asking for the old.
Yeah. But for me, it totally depends on what kind of area I'm playing, and people who are growing up with electronic music like early on, like let's say like 20, 25 years ago, for them, for the time being, is still like the classic they're asking for. And countries where the development was a little bit later, like the Eastern European countries,
Yep.
they are way more into Feel What You Want. So Feel What
Okay.
You Want is like the most asked
Yeah.
track in a way.
Also very nice one.
And then yeah, and then for example, in Brazil, it's more mixed. It's Feel What You Want and For the Time Being. And in Chile, for example, it's more For the Time Being. So it's like very regional
Yeah.
in a way. And then unfortunately, I never played in South Africa, but like I always see like You That I'm With from my first album with Ian Whitelaw. It's 2 years ago, like some big DJs played it out. Um, and everybody was singing along. He was turning down the volume, and everybody still knows the lyrics of the track from 2004, which
Yeah.
is also incredible. So I guess if I would play there, they would ask
Yeah.
for You That I'm With. So it's like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's
No,
those
it's
tracks.
area. That's for sure. For
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
like
yeah.
South Africa, it's "You Make Me Feel." It's the biggest track.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah,
and
okay.
the people used to play it pitch down
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
South Africa. So like, I'm still thinking of doing like a slow up version.
Ah, yeah, nice.
Yeah, maybe I don't have the samples anymore. So
Actually, I teamed up with one of my artists from Zatar, a guy by the name of Roo, ROO. He's from Jordan, and we did a Amapiano version of You That I'm With. So we are planning to release this as soon as possible as well. Like we had like some revisits of the 2003 album, and so this is one of the tracks we want to release as well.
beautiful.
Yeah, let's see
But
about that.
like talking about like lost samples and stuff, I think that's another good thing that working with Superstition Entertainment Network, they really come from a long time, and they know they did all the mistakes before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so usually when there's been remixes, all the parts have been saved to
Yes.
some safe storage, and yeah, I know that many labels I work for, where I didn't even have the stems anymore for the tracks. The stems are gone. No one like saved them
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for. It's I think for new labels, it's one of the important things to
Yeah.
remember. That always save the samples, or also for artists. I mean, in
Yeah.
general, try to keep as much of the original stem that you have.
Yeah, nowadays you can extract it from the from the
Yeah,
it's not the same, I know, but it's like
it works very great for minimal tracks.
yeah.
The Big Fake, for example, we did this just recently, and it worked very great. The beats, the synth, and the vocals.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's very easy extraction. But if you have a very complex track, then like where like frequencies cross,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
not so easy anymore.
Very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to the feedback when the tracks are like getting out, like in a way like they are really like um getting played, and we see the first
Yeah.
videos of people playing it
Yeah.
and stuff. So I think now while we are talking, it's still not out, the whole package. It's
Yeah.
going to be released next week or something.
Exactly.
We also have a remix by a guy called Nope, which is a little bit more modern. He's like a producer for indie dance, melodic house, and he made like still like a more classic version for his style. He did like a like a more accessible like version. Also, I'm also curious about that, and yeah, thanks a lot for
Yeah.
the
No.
fantastic remix and for the
My pleasure.
quick
It's been an honor to be
tech talk. Yeah.
remixing this.
Awesome.